The After Death began as a zine. It had a simple short story that I left open-ended. I had not given it an overarching story arc, I hadn't given it much direction, and I hadn't given it any color. These are the original drawings from that zine. It's funny because I drew on the front and the back, probably destroying any sort of future sales of original art. After I started putting the comic on Instagram, it began to generate some buzz. My next thought was to keep going and keep making comic strips, but even then they were more or less just story concepts in a sketchbook. I'd write out some jokes, draw some panels, scan them, add the text, put them online, boom. I still wasn't thinking about color just yet. But soon, a buddy of mine, who has started up a really small publishing house, wanted to make comics out of it. Like actual comics. And that's the moment the thoughts of taking the After Death seriously came into my head. Now was the time to maybe figure out a story arc. Maybe figure out where I could take these characters. And maybe figure out what colors I needed to be using. There's a couple of things you need to know about me and colors. First is, I'm naturally more of a realistic artist. I often try to make things look close to life in my pen and ink work and in my paintings. And then second is that my next major artistic medium is photography. So in that, I'm all about light and shadow, and that just contributes to the realism part of my aesthetic. Drawing in a more cartoony fashion, that's a bit of a challenge for me. And the same can be said about color. When I sit down to color, I tend to want to color the sky blue, and the grass green, and the trees brown. But when you look at other successful illustrators out there, you quickly get the idea that those rules don't have to apply. So I had to figure out what my color palette was going to be. And the best way I knew how was literally at my fingertips. I hopped on Instagram and began looking around for illustrations. I found an account, I think it's at illustrations_daily, I think. I mean, you should be able to see it on the screen. I literally began scrolling down and just letting the images float by until one of them caught my eye. And when one did, I saved it. And then later on I made a folder on my Instagram called Color Scheme and would repeat the process and just started building up images in that folder. After I had a small collection, I then went back through and took my time to look at each illustration and ask myself about the colors. What did I like? Could I see myself using any of the colors in the After Death? Were there certain colors I liked more than others? Eventually, I honed in on these two images. In the image of the young witch, I really liked the yellow and the greenish yellow used on the gas pump. I really liked the use of orangish red and the green sky that almost fades to like a navy color. In the image of the astronaut, again, I liked the use of red, yellow, and orange, but I really liked the dark, almost gray purple in his suit and in the sky. I should also mention that I often visit and revisit illustrators that I follow whose use of color I really admire. A limited color palette and the impact it can make in visual storytelling is an art that I admittedly still haven't quite pinned down yet. Therefore, I make a point to hop on these people's feed and just look at their images and take mental notes as to what they are doing, how they're using color, and I try to see how I can use it in the After Death. By the way, this artist is named Carolyn Wilson. Her Instagram handle is her name. Carolyn is at KERILYNN Wilson. And she's amazing. One of my favorites. You should go follow her. Back to the color, though. Next, I asked myself, what now? I've got colors I like and a sort of general idea of what I want the After Death to start to look like. So that warranted a trip to the art supply store to see what I could find. Generally, I use Hobby Lobby as my art supplier of choice, but that's quickly changing. But that's a topic for a whole nother time. But at this time, my next step was to take a trip to Hobby Lobby and check out their color pencils. Now, they have Faber-Castell and Prismacolors on display where you can just test them out individually. So I took a sketchbook, and with those two illustrations on my phone, I set out to match those colors as best that I could. I was able to get close to what I wanted, but not quite. And I found myself walking away with a bit of a mix of the two brands in order to meet the color palette that I was looking for. And I started coloring. I decided on colors for the sky at night to be purple versus the sky at day to be teal. I like the idea of yellow grass during the day and a deep red at night. The point is, I started making these decisions. These were what the colors would be of these things, no matter what. And that helped. It helps me because when it comes to seeing things visually, I tend to follow the rules, and in order to get around rules like the sky is blue or the grass is green, it's easy for me to just replace those rules with a new set. So now I think the sky is teal, the grass is yellow, etc. Looking back over the illustrations that I've made more recently, I can tell I still struggle with those rules, and I'm hoping to be able to break away from that. It's just really hard for me to see things in an unnatural color, but I'm learning, as we all should be, all of the time. The final leg of my journey was to get rid of my hodgepodge collection of color pencils and purchase myself a nice set. I got some recommendations from fellow artists that use color pencils, and I read up on some reviews and landed on this Faber-Castell Polychromos set of 120 pencils. They are pretty much the most expensive single art supply I've ever bought for myself. Once I had gotten them, it was time for me to sit down and match the color palette I was already using with their colors. So I would choose a pencil whose color I think would match, scribble some color down, and then either move up or down their palette and compare and contrast the colors. I did this with every color that I use, which is a palette of 13 colors. And I wrote down the corresponding color's name and number. I did this because I will use these up in no time and want to be able to order the individual pencils in the future. And that's it. That's how I landed on the colors that I use. A quick disclaimer, I'm still trying to figure out how to best use them in my artwork and my cartooning. Like I said, I struggle with the colors almost every single time I sit down to color. And my instinct is to color the world the colors that they are. But I don't want to preach that, because in illustration, in cartooning, and in lots of important forms of art, colors are often best used when contradicting your expectations. So challenge yourself. And I'm going to keep challenging myself, and hopefully I'll retrain my brain so that it accepts a red sky and purple trees and teal squirrels and neon yellow turtles.